Duggal, it's my pleasure to welcome Mayor Bloomberg, distinguished guests, and members of the media to the Greenhouse. 5 years ago, the mayor and I stood here in the Brooklyn Navy Yard and shared our commitment to grow an industrial community where green technology would thrive. Under Mayor Bloomberg's leadership, the city has become cleaner, greener, and more beautiful than ever before. Today, we are providing that green technology can be safe, clean, and cost-effective, not only because it's the right thing or fashionable thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Also, it's about time we export green innovation and not American jobs. Our LumiSolaire off-grid lighting is a reality, providing street lights here at the Navy Yard and across the country. And this building, which was once the birthplace of battleships, now serves as a living laboratory for sustainability. On October 29th of last year, you remember we had an unexpected visit from Sandy. This building was decimated. I want you to visualize 4.5 feet of water in this building right where we are sitting. And while the Brooklyn Navy Yard and much of the city was left in the dark, our solar and wind-powered lights stayed on. We have recovered and are better than before. We are all New Yorkers. This is what we do best. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the President of Great Borough of Staten Island, Jim Molinaro. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome and good afternoon. On October 29, 2012, New York City was hit by a horrific hurricane, taking the lives of 45 people, destroying thousands and thousands of homes, leaving people without shelter, food, or clothing. We were desperate for help, and actually we were going in all different directions. But we didn't have to fear because we had our leader, Michael Bloomberg, who responded just absolutely terrific. The next day, there was Deputy Borough President, the Deputy Mayor, Patty Harris. There was Jeanette Sadikan, Kes Calloway. There was Amanda Burden. I had more officials on Staten Island than City Hall had. And some people were wondering if City Hall was moved to Staten Island. And I said, just not yet. Desperate for help, and they answered the call. But this is not the first tragedy that's taken over New York City. The city suffered the Great Fire of 1935, which burned down all of South Shore. We had the Great Blizzard of '88 that paralyzed the city. And of course, we had the terrorist attack of 9/11. And then we had a leader in place that brought us back. He brought us back, and Lower Manhattan came back faster and stronger than anyone thought possible that it would ever be done. And that took place because of the leadership of Michael Bloomberg. Over the past 7 months, again with the leadership of Mayor Bloomberg, we mobilized the most comprehensive disaster relief effort that any locality, local or nationwide, ever saw. But you must realize that we are a city of survivors. We are a city that believes. People are here, the kind of people that say, just go do it. And today, we come together again in that same spirit. Like those earlier generations, we believe in the promise of our city. We believe that tomorrow can be better than today. And it is up to us to make that way. Rather than talk about it with plans that never get fulfilled, we are actually moving forward and doing something about it. That being said, I would like to take this opportunity to show you a short video.
Breaking weather news right now, the very latest advisory on Hurricane Sandy.
Clearly, climate change is here.
75-mile-per-hour Category 1 hurricane moving north-northeast.
We live on the water, in the water. In fact, it's the water and the great commerce that the water made possible that led to the growth of New York City.
Latest information shows that the storm is moving faster than before.
And we're also vulnerable because of the water.
Conditions outside are dangerous, and they're only going to get worse in the hours ahead.
Seeing the boardwalk float down the street and the damage the boardwalk did to specifically the front of my house.
The water rushed underneath the boardwalk, chunks of it now flying down the streets.
We're no longer in South Beach, it just wasn't safe anymore.
I have some video of some kind at an explosion at a Con Ed plant on 14th Street.
One of the great things about New York is that we rally together around emergencies.
And every time that something really serious has happened, New Yorkers have stepped up. They've taken each other's backs. They've fed each other. They've clothed each other. They've supported each other.
Superstorm Sandy really demonstrated how important it is to prepare for extreme weather events, as they're going to be increasingly more frequent and more severe due to climate change.
Well, I would say that New York City is the point of the spear in addressing climate change.
Starting back in 2008, New York City began to develop key programs to develop a resilient city.
I think the city was definitely more prepared for Superstorm Sandy than we would have been had we not done the work we did inside PlaNYC. Just look at Brooklyn Bridge Park, which was built in a way that was, thinking about storm surge and sea level rise.
There were many vulnerable communities that we now know are going to need more help. And so all of us are working to think about how we strengthen that resiliency.
I've spoken to thousands of residents since the storm. I've only spoken to one person who said they want to leave. What we're thinking about is how do we protect the community to make it so that this community can thrive and people can stay.
Let me be clear, we are not going to abandon the waterfront. We're not going to leave the Rockaways or Coney Island or Staten Island South Shore. But we can't just rebuild what was there and hope for the best. We have to build smarter and stronger and more sustainably. I have every confidence that by confronting this challenge head-on, we will succeed.
Less than a month after that tragedy in October, the mayor assembled his staff, Kat Calloway, Seth Pinsky, and said, let's build a plan to rebuild. Let's build a plan that these people can be held whole again, that these people can go back to their homes if they want. a plan that could prepare us so in case there's another Sandy, we're better prepared. So today, our leader, Mayor Mike Bloomberg, is here to detail that plan to us. So Mike Bloomberg. Okay. I just want to say there's a man that was in the right place at the right time for the right reason.
Jimmy, thank you, Mr. Borough President, for your great leadership in helping Staten Island recover. And I also want to thank Baldev Duggal for his determination to turn disaster into opportunity. Welcome, everyone, to this beautiful greenhouse, the perfect symbol of our city's determination to rebuild and to renew. Now, not long ago, this building was an abandoned shell, much like most of the Navy Yard, and it was a far cry from the glory days when this was one of the most important naval building sites in the country and crucial to our victory in World War II. In the 40s, the yard was nicknamed the Can-Do Yard because no place better exemplified the spirit and the resolve of our country. And I can't think of a better ways to describe it today. The Navy Yard was hit hard by Sandy, as you heard, but within a few days it was back up and buzzing again. And today the yard is home to 330 businesses and 6,400 jobs, nearly twice as many as there were here back in '01. And it's helping New York drive the 21st century economy. From a 3D printing lab that's helping revolutionize manufacturing, to a modular construction site that's helping change the building industry, to the clean energy and sustainable technologies being pioneered here. Today, this building that once turned out battleships now helps lead us in another battle, a battle that may well define our future for generations to come. The battle against climate change. It is a battle that our administration has been waging as aggressively as any city in the world. In fact, I think it's fair to say that PlaNYC is the most ambitious sustainability program any city has ever undertaken. Six years ago, PlaNYC sounded the alarm about the dangers our city faces due to the effects of climate change today, including the worsening impact of extreme weather. Since then, we've done a lot to attack the causes of climate change and make our city less vulnerable to its possible effects, and strengthening the building code, building green infrastructure, including our nationally recognized Blue Belt to prevent flooding, and taking steps that have helped reduce the city's greenhouse gas emissions by 16%, more than halfway towards our goal of a 30% reduction by 2030. We haven't waited for Washington to lead the climate change charge. If we did, we'd still be waiting. We've attacked the problem head-on, just as many other cities are now doing. And through the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, which I've chaired since 2010, we're working with mayors around the world to share strategies for lowering emissions even further. But Hurricane Sandy, which tragically took the lives of 43 New Yorkers, made it all too clear that no matter how far we've come, we still face real, immediate threats. We've been working ever since to help communities recover and rebuild, and also to better prepare them and our entire city for what comes next. Last month, we released a detailed after-action review of the city's performance during and after Hurricane Sandy, and we're implementing 60 recommendations that we think will ensure we do an even better job when the storm hits next time. In December, I asked Seth Pinsky, the president of the city's Economic Development Corporation, to lead a team of people, including Mark Ricks and Takumbo Shabawali, who would develop a comprehensive plan to prepare our city for the climate risks we face. I asked them to use PlaNYC as a foundation and to work with Sergei Manovsky and our long-term Office of Planning and Sustainability, which spearheaded the implementation of PlaNYC. And over the past 6 months, We brought in dozens of experts from highly specialized fields, climate science and engineering, healthcare, telecommunications, utilities, insurance, and together we took an in-depth look at what actually happened during Sandy and why. We assessed what the risks are for the years to come, to our communities, to our infrastructure, and to all New Yorkers. We analyzed the most effective and achievable ways to confront those risks. We engaged dozens of elected officials from city, state, and federal governments. We talked with hundreds of community organizations, businesses, and residents from every area impacted by Sandy, and we consulted with people from every sector. Let's take a quick look at some of the work we did and the people who were involved. Well, watch the video.
Welcome, and thanks for coming to the public workshop. The Special Initiative for Rebuilding and Resiliency is something you're going to hear more about tonight, but we've been conducting these workshops in areas all around the city.
One of the great attributes of the SIR process is that the city started by looking at what worked, what didn't work.
They didn't just look at Sandy and try to prepare for the next Sandy. They looked at different types of storms so that they could prepare for some other storms that we expect are more likely.
We suggest that more dunes are built to divert the water.
Certainly the use of salt marsh, certainly the usage of bulkheading in certain locations.
We also wanted them to do a continuous boardwalk.
Revitalize the beachfront. We focused on the idea of wave breaks.
There is no one solution, but rather a series of solutions that are really called for.
Climate change is one of the great challenges of this century. Every century has challenges. This is the one that's on our plate.
Climate change is the reason why we are here today, one of the main reasons why we are here today.
Hurricane Sandy, devastating as it was, provides us an opportunity to develop a future resilient city for New York.
A strong community equals resiliency. When people can come together and work harmoniously as a team, not just by themselves, but with government agencies. This interaction with city and community should not stop.
For you guys to come to us, to hear us speak about the issues, you guys can get real information. But of course, we're Rockaway and we do expect some results.
We believe in the promise of our city. We believe that tomorrow can be better than today, and we know that it's up to us to make it so.
We think it's time to be brave and make some tough decisions.
That video offers just a glimpse of the round-the-clock work that our team did. It was, I think it's fair to say, an unprecedented post-disaster effort, creating a level of analysis we think never before undertaken by a city government. And today, as a result of all that work, we're releasing a 400-page report detailing over 250 concrete recommendations for how to confront the risks we face and build a stronger and more resilient city. These include comprehensive plans for strengthening 15 critical areas like coastal defenses, buildings, utilities, fuel and food supply, healthcare, transportation, and telecommunications. For all these 15 areas, the report takes a top-to-bottom look at their infrastructure, their governance, how they were impacted by Sandy, and most importantly, risks that they face due to climate change and what exactly we can do better to prepare them for it. The report also includes 5 chapters focused specifically on the areas that suffered the most damage from Sandy. For each community, we looked at their specific vulnerabilities, and for each we developed a tailored, workable plan for a more resilient future. This was a phenomenal amount of work. You'll be impressed when you see it. And I want to thank everyone who was part of it, including our whole team involved in the Special Initiative Rebuilding and Resiliency effort, including our City Planning Department, led by Amanda Burden. And I think they really all deserve a big round of applause. Now, the plan is incredibly ambitious, and much of the work will extend far beyond the next 203 days that we have in our administration. But we refuse to pass responsibility for creating a plan on to the next administration. This is urgent work, and it must begin now. So we'll use every one of the next 203 days to get as much work as possible underway and to lock in commitments wherever we can. Today I'd like to discuss with you some of the plan's key elements. And let's begin with an important acknowledgement. As bad as Sandy was, future storms could be even worse. In fact, because of rising temperatures and sea levels, even a storm that is not as large as Sandy could down the road be even more destructive. To understand what we're up against, we reconvened the New York City Panel on Climate Change, which we created as part of PlaNYC. It's led by climate scientists, and it's one of the nation's first government-sponsored efforts to study the effects of the changing climate on a metropolitan area. Over the last several months, they developed New York-specific climate projections, which we released yesterday. Here's FEMA's 100-year flood map, which was in effect when Sandy hit, 1983, and you can see the parts that are vulnerable. FEMA has since released a new version of the map, a 2013 version. And if we go back and forth between the 83 and the 2013 ones, you can see how it's grown. That's what's happened in the period from 83 to 13. Now let's look at what goes on in the future, because those maps don't take into account potential changes going forward, like rising sea levels, which our panel forecasts could increase by more than 2.5 feet by mid-century. Let's go back to the 83 one, then the 213, and then the 220. 220 is only 7 years from now, and look at how much of the area is covered. But that's not all. Let's look even further ahead. First, slide 2083, so you can see the old one. Then 2013, here's 83, 2013, 2020, and now 2050, right there. The area covered keeps growing. You can see from the beginning, our city will be much more vulnerable to flooding in the decades ahead. In fact, we expect that by mid-century, up to a quarter of all New York City's land area, where 800,000 residents live today, will be in the floodplain. If we do nothing more than 40 miles of our waterfront, 40 miles of our waterfront could see flooding on a regular basis just during normal high tides. We don't need a storm for that. Think about what that means, just in financial terms. Sandy cost our city $19 billion in damages and lost economic activity. And we now forecast that a storm like Sandy could cost nearly 5 times that much by mid-century, around $90 billion. Now that leaves us with a few clear choices. We can do nothing and expose ourselves to an increasing frequency of Sandy-like storms that do more and more damage. Or we could abandon the waterfront, or we can make the investments necessary to build a stronger, more resilient New York, investments that will pay for themselves many times over in the years to come. I strongly believe we have to prepare for what the scientists say is a likely scenario. Whether you believe climate change is real or not is beside the point. The bottom line is we can't run the risk. And as New Yorkers, we cannot and we will not abandon our waterfront. It is one of our greatest assets. We must protect it, not retreat from it. For decades, the city allowed the waterfront to become polluted, degraded, and abandoned. And we've spent the past 11 years reversing that history and reclaiming the waterfront for all New Yorkers to enjoy, and we're not going to stop now. To illustrate the futility of retreat, consider that within FEMA's new 100-year flood maps, there are more than 500 million square feet of New York City buildings, equivalent to the entire city of Minneapolis. These communities are home to almost 400,000 people and more than 270,000 jobs. And they're not going anywhere, and we cannot and will not abandon them. It's up to us to make these communities stronger and safer. And that goes for all communities that could be impacted by a storm, not just those hit hard by Sandy. We're not going to make the mistake of fighting the last war. We have to look ahead to anticipate any and all future needs, not only hurricanes, but also from droughts, heavy downpours like we had last week, and heat waves, which may be longer and more intense in the years to come. Now, there's no single solution to all of these challenges. And we won't get all this work done at once. That would literally be impossible. But piece by piece, over many years and even decades, we can build a city that's capable of preparing better, withstanding more, and overcoming anything. Make no mistake, this is a defining challenge of our future. And if anyone is up to the task of defending and adopting the city that they love, I think it's New Yorkers. This is too important, and it's up to all of us to work together to accelerate our progress. And it's up to you to hold the next administration accountable for getting it done. Let's start by talking about the first layer of our defense, our coastal protections, beginning with our beaches. Sandy made clear the important role that beaches themselves can play in preventing flooding. Here are before and after photos of Beach 94th Street and the Rockaways. It has no dunes, and it's a washout. Now, here are photos from just 2 miles down the road, down the shore, at Beach 56th Street. There are dunes, strong dunes, and it's survived. It's mostly okay. This combination of dunes and wide beaches with ample sands on them is a potent one. So right now, today in Staten Island, we're taking immediate measures to restore beaches and build resilient protective barriers. We're working with the Army Corps of Engineers to strengthen dune systems and beaches across Staten Island, South Brooklyn, and Queens, including in Coney Island and along the Rockaways. There is short-term work that will be completed this year, with additional phases to follow in the immediate years to come. In Breezy Point, we're proposing a new double dune system that would offer 2 layers of defense to this community that Sandy devastated, a strategy that could eventually be rolled out across the Rockaways. The Rockaway Peninsula is one of the most exposed parts of our city, but this dune system, when combined with other protections we're proposing today, will ensure that communities all along the peninsula are better protected from future storms. Thanks go to Veronica White at Parks and David Burney at the Department of Design and Construction for their incredibly quick work to begin working on our beaches. And thanks to collaboration between many city agencies and thousands of New York City service volunteers lending a hand, we not only opened our beaches in time for the summer season as promised, we also made a lot of headway strengthening the coast in vulnerable areas. We couldn't have done it without the huge effort of the Army Corps of Engineers under the strong leadership of Colonel Paul Owen here in the New York area, and the State Department of Environmental Conservation under Commissioner Joseph Martins and Regional Director Vanisha Lannon, who's a former member of our administration. They all deserve a real nice round of applause. Now, nothing this monumental can happen without local and state and federal governments working together, and I did want to thank President Obama and Governor Cuomo and their teams, especially HUD Secretary Sean Donovan, who have helped us slash red tape and get work done as quickly as possible. A stronger dune system and widened beaches will be our top priority for our shoreline, but that's only the beginning. Our report includes 37 coastal defense projects, including restoring natural wetlands to lessen waves on the south shore of Staten Island and throughout Jamaica Bay, including near Howard Beach, and placing offshore breakwaters in areas where waves pose the greatest threat, including a first phase of these defenses off Great Kills Harbor on Staten Island, which will work with the Army Corps of Engineers to begin studying immediately. Fortifying our natural defenses is critical, but it's not enough. Even though a giant barrier across our entire harbor is just not practical or affordable, smaller surge barriers are feasible, and they could have prevented a lot of the flooding that we saw during Sandy. And that's especially true of what's called backdoor flooding, when water overflows rivers, creeks, and canals. So today we're proposing that several surge barriers be considered to shut those back doors. Building them will take years of design and construction work, but we can begin the process now, and we will. One storm surge barrier would be at Newtown Creek, where the storm surge pushed floodwaters into the surrounding neighborhoods of Greenpoint and Long Island City and as far inland as Maspeth. A surge barrier at the mouth of Newtown Creek would dramatically reduce storm flooding in those neighborhoods, and will work with the Army Corps of Engineers to begin studying it immediately. We're also starting a series of studies of other possible waterfront barriers too. Take Coney Island. Much of the flooding that occurred along the Coney Island Peninsula was in neighborhoods like Gravesend, and was actually not the result of water crashing up over the beach and onto the boardwalk. Instead, it was caused by water coming around the peninsula and up Coney Island Creek, a back door that Sandy easily kicked open. A tidal barrier across the Coney Island Creek could protect that neighborhood from flooding, and the city could build new parkland across the barrier itself, connecting two existing parks. Water entering through these back doors accounted for a lot of the flood damage. And the biggest back door of all, of course, was Jamaica Bay. A surge barrier at the mouth of the bay could help protect the communities of Garrison Beach, Howard Beach, Broad Channel, Canarsie, and Mill Basin, all of which experienced devastating flooding during Sandy. Now, that surge barrier would be very complicated and would take years to build. And it would first require real study so we can determine if it's worthwhile. But that analysis can also begin today. And right now, the Army Corps of Engineers is conducting a $20 million study of flood protection possibilities across the entire Northeast seaboard. When it comes to New York Harbor, we want them to do a full study of all the longer-term projects we're proposing, including the Jamaica Bay barrier, as well as a possible barrier across the Gowanus Canal. And we'll work with the Corps and with our representatives in Congress to make sure that happens. But the fact that we're putting up a proposal now lays down a marker and gives them some guideposts. In addition to dunes, beach widening, and tidal barriers, our coastal defense plan also calls for building a diverse network of bulkheads, levees, and other protections. For instance, to protect against flooding and erosion, we'll install piles of massive stone, also known as revetments, in vulnerable places along the south shore of Staten Island, including in Wolf's Pond, where we're already at work, and in southern Brooklyn along Coney Island Creek. We'll also work with the Army Corps of Engineers to ensure that a strong system of permanent levees, flood walls, and other protective measures gets built along the east shore of Staten Island from Fort Wadsworth to Tottenville, including Midland Beach. This Staten Island project will rise as high as 15 to 20 feet, protecting communities that were devastated by Sandy and that have seen coastal flooding even during regular northeasters for years. And we'll work to make sure that it provides solid protection, but also that it integrates into the existing community. What I mean by that is a flood wall doesn't have to be a wall. It can be part of an elevated park or boardwalk and still block floodwaters. The Corps has the funds for this project, and we'll work with the City Council will include the necessary city match of around $50 million in the budget that will go into effect this July 1, which is another action that we can and will take immediately. The state will need to provide a match too, and we're urging them to do that, and you can be very helpful. Call your assembly person, call your senator, call the gov. We're also going to expand and accelerate the blue belts that have been incredibly successful at absorbing floodwaters in Staten Island. In addition to the almost $50 million of city capital funding that will support the projects I've described, today we're announcing that we will invest approximately $20 million to accelerate the Mid-Island section of the Staten Island Blue Belt at Last Chance Pond Park. And we'll continue the expansion of blue belts to the other boroughs, including Van Cortlandt Park and the Bronx. In more heavily developed parts of our city that saw flooding, we're also recommending a combination of permanent elements and flexible flood protection, systems that can be temporarily fortified before a storm rolls in, and then put back in storage for the next time. For example, in places like Red Hook, Chinatown, the Lower East Side, East Harlem, Hunts Point, and in front of Bellevue Hospital and along Hospital Row, and possibly down to the Battery. A system of strategically placed flood walls, levees, and other features will provide a strong line of defense against flooding. These will be built of permanent elements like planters and elevated esplanades, as well as temporary walls with removable panels like you see on this slide. Eventually, as more resources are secured, we imagine extending systems like this up the Harlem River and around the west side of Manhattan and elsewhere in the city. Now, some of our waterfront protections may be controversial, some may block views, but the alternative is to get flooded out, or worse. We can't stop nature, and if we're going to save lives and protect the lives of communities, we're going to have to live with some of the new realities. Phase 1 of our comprehensive coastal protection plan includes initiatives that should begin immediately, including many elements that we have already begun. We can build them out. We'll make all of our coastal communities safer day by day, including for more than the 80,000 New Yorkers in 400 public housing buildings hard hit by the storm. Our coastal protections can also open up a range of exciting possibilities for our cities. For instance, during Hurricane Sandy, the east side of Lower Manhattan was badly flooded, while the Hudson River waterfront south of Chambers Street and north of the Battery held up pretty well. What made the difference? Battery Park City made the difference. In fact, Battery Park City would have protected inland areas, including the World Trade Center site, had floodwaters not been able to penetrate low-lying coastline to both the north and the south. When it was built in the 1970s, Battery Park City was designed to withstand major flooding, and for the most part, it did. We can achieve the same thing on the east side of Lower Manhattan. We can build it out, raise it above the flood level, and develop it. Call it Seaport City. Yes, it would be expensive to build, but over time it could prove to be a great investment, just as Battery Park City has proven to be. Demand for housing in Lower Manhattan has never been stronger, and our city needs more modern office space. Seaport City would capitalize on that demand, bringing thousands of new residents and hundreds of businesses to the area, while also protecting existing residents and businesses from future storms. It's an ambitious idea, yes, but so was Battery Park City. And we believe it's an idea that deserves careful attention and further study, which will start immediately, and it will be up to our successor to continue that work. Now, all of these plans will make our city better prepared to handle extreme water. But we should also look at them as opportunities to make our communities stronger and more vibrant. Why shouldn't a tidal barrier in Coney Island also be a bridge to a new protected waterfront park? Why shouldn't we integrate our coastal defenses into beautiful waterfront esplanades? Why can't a fortification that protects Lower Manhattan against rising seas also be the foundation for a vibrant new neighborhood? This is New York City. We've always turned challenges into opportunities. Sandy was a temporary setback that can ultimately propel us forward if we think big and seize the moment. However, for all we do, we can't entirely prevent water from entering our neighborhoods. That's just the real world. So our plan is designed also to ensure that when flooding and other extreme weather do happen, buildings can survive with less damage. We've proposed new zoning that makes it easier to elevate existing buildings above the floodplain. And we're also working with Speaker Quinn and the Building Resiliency Task Force to implement changes to the city's construction codes that will raise standards even higher for new construction. But 95% of the 800 buildings that were severely damaged or destroyed during Sandy were built more than 50 years ago, prior to modern building code standards. We've already helped thousands of homes, businesses, cultural groups, and nonprofits that were damaged rebuild stronger and safer. And with the $1.77 billion in federal relief funding we've been allocated, we'll be able to help many more. That federal relief funding includes more than $100 million we've dedicated to public housing damaged by Sandy, on top of the hundreds of millions of dollars in FEMA funding that NYCHA is likely to receive, money that NYCHA is already putting to work protecting buildings from future storms. But for every building severely damaged by Sandy, there are many more that are vulnerable, or that were damaged but not enough to qualify for federal relief to elevate them out of the floodplain. We want to make those buildings stronger and safer as well. So we will work with HUD to create a $1.2 billion incentive program to encourage all vulnerable property owners to make additional flood protection improvements to their properties. This $1.2 billion program will be the largest local resiliency incentive program ever created, and it will help owners flood-proof electrical, heating, and telecommunications and other critical systems. For the most vulnerable buildings, we'll also offer incentives for structural improvements as well. This program will mean that when extreme weather hits, people will be able to return to their homes and businesses faster and find far less damage when they do. And that brings us to another enormous challenge facing all of these communities: the price of flood insurance. Because of federal law passed last year before Sandy hit, the cost of federal flood insurance will skyrocket. And when FEMA's new flood maps for the New York area become official, these rates will go up even more. A typical family living in Tottenville, Staten Island, where the median household income is $80,000 a year, may soon have to pay up to $10,000 a year for flood insurance. With the floodplain expanding, more and more New Yorkers are going to need this kind of insurance. In fact, if you live in a flood zone and have a federally backed mortgage, you have to buy flood insurance, and most people buy it through the federal program. Here's the problem. For the most part, the federal program will cut you a break on insurance only if you elevate your house. As you can see from this slide, your premium drops from about $9,500 to about $1,500 by elevating your home. Elevated homes may be fine for many beachfront communities along the eastern seaboard, but let me tell you, needless to say, New York City is different. Many of our buildings can't physically be elevated for structural or other reasons. This one-size-fits-all approach simply doesn't work for us, and it needs to be changed. And if we want people to make investments to protect their homes, we have to give them incentives to do exactly that. So today we're proposing a solution to this problem, a partial rate reduction for homes that make flood-related improvements even if they do not involve elevation. Under our proposal, if you take action to protect your home from flooding, like raising electrical systems or boilers out of the floodplain, your insurance premiums will drop. We can't do this without the federal government support, and we're going to make it a top priority in Washington in the weeks and months ahead to secure that. This is a crucial public safety issue, and it's a crucial pocketbook issue as well. For thousands of New Yorkers, the difference in the cost of insurance we're talking about is the difference between being able to stay in their communities and having to move out. What a shame it would be for all of those communities if after everything they've been through, after all the work they've done to rebuild, if families were priced out by insurance costs that don't reflect market realities. We just can't let that happen. Now, there are also New Yorkers who aren't required to have flood insurance, but probably should have it, and would like to buy it if there were a reasonable option. So we'll work with our leaders in Washington to push for the creation of low-cost, high-deductible policies so that more New Yorkers are covered just in case of an emergency. And we'll make sure we work with them to make sure they create a program of federal subsidies for low-income homeowners, which FEMA is supposed to be exploring by law. A federal insurance program should encourage people to protect themselves, not to do nothing and hope for the best. Now, next, just as we need a plan to protect our homes and our businesses, we also need a plan to protect our hospitals and healthcare facilities. And thanks to the incredible work of thousands of health professionals, city agencies, and volunteers, no lives were lost when many of these facilities were evacuated because of Sandy. But we want to avoid emergency evacuations wherever possible. And we have to make sure the facilities we depend on in emergencies are there for us when we need them the most. So we'll amend the construction codes to require new facilities to meet a high level of flood resistance and have access to backup capacity for power and other critical systems, not only in the case of flooding, but also heat waves. We'll require that existing facilities meet many of the same benchmarks by the year 2030. And today we're proposing a $50 million incentive program to help some of the most financially challenged nursing homes and adult care facilities meet those requirements much sooner. We also have to make sure that extreme weather doesn't knock out other critical infrastructure. Millions of New Yorkers lost power during Sandy, and hundreds of thousands lost heat, internet service, or phone service. Fuel supplies were also knocked out, resulting in long waits at the pumps. And over the last 6 months, we've looked at every aspect of how our major infrastructure networks run, what their rules and regulations are, who controls them, where their key vulnerabilities lie, and what we can do to make sure that future events don't knock them out like Hurricane Sandy did. And what we learned is that many of the operators who run these networks have failed to make continuous service during and after extreme weather a major priority, while others need to make it more of a priority. We must change that, and we will. New Yorkers rely on these networks. We pay for them. We grant them access to our streets. But when a crisis hits, when we really need them the most, we lose access to them. That is just simply not accessible in this day and age. Most of those networks are not run or regulated by the city, but the time has come for all of our private sector partners to step up to the plate and join us in protecting New Yorkers. Let me give you some examples. Consider our electrical network. Con Ed has made major investments in resiliency, and that's a big reason why we haven't had any major blackouts in a few years, and they do deserve real credit for that. You don't remember what it was like 3 and 4 years ago, but the last few years, not one. But about 2/3 of our major substations and nearly all of the city's power plants are in floodplains today, and every summer our electrical grid comes under extreme stress during heat waves. Both risks will get worse with climate change. A day without power can cost New York City more than $1 billion. But regulators, utilities, and generators are not sufficiently addressing these risks, and that needs to change now. We have to work in partnership with them. Criticizing them is not going to accomplish anything. We're all in this together. And so the city will work with the governor, private companies, the Public Service Commission, and state agencies that regulate utilities to try to make sure that our systems don't fail us. And that includes a systematic plan for hardening infrastructure and clear performance guidelines and expectations for maintaining service during extreme weather events. Right now, there are benchmarks for reliability that utility companies have to meet. But those benchmarks largely exclude storms and don't account for climate change. And that makes no sense. So we'll work to fix that. In fact, just last week, we submitted over 400 pages of testimony to the Public Service Commission proposing stronger measures to protect the power grid from storm surge, heat waves, and other risks. And we'll make sure that companies take these measures seriously. Our utility systems are run by private companies, but they must be accountable to the public. And because the city has a public interest in them, and so we have to make sure that they do what's right, not only for stockholders, but also for all New Yorkers. Our goal is not only to harden the electric system, but to develop a cleaner, more reliable, affordable, and innovative energy system. As you know, our plan calls for utilities and regulators to diversify the source of energy feeding the city, to fix rules that govern the growth of distributed generation, including for customers who want to generate their own power, and to work with the city to evaluate and adopt microgrid pilots. We have the same goal for our telecommunications network. It's not just hardening, but modernizing. Here the city does have some leverage. We have franchise and other agreements that let telecom companies use our streets for wiring. Well, if they want to continue using our streets, they have to make resiliency a priority. They are running a commercial enterprise, but they are using public assets to do it. And we have every right to expect them to protect public safety. So we'll set out a framework for the city to use the franchise review and other processes to ensure these private companies invest in public safety measures. We're planning a new Office of Resiliency in the city's Information Technology Agency to design and enforce these standards and to monitor the performance of telecommunication providers. We have to hold companies accountable for keeping the lights on, the phones working, and the heat on, especially during emergencies. And our proposals will help do exactly that, including for other critical networks like our food supply and our fuel supply. In New York City, people don't think about it this way, but over 90% of our gas stations had power after Sandy. Just most had no gasoline, largely due to breakdowns in the regional supply chain. That's also not acceptable, and it's avoidable with the right investments and oversight. So we're going to work with the fuel industry and the federal government to make pipelines and terminals more resistant to weather and better able to bounce back when interruptions do occur. Just because the companies are located outside of New York City doesn't provide them with an excuse from our point of view. We still depend on them, and so it's up to us to work with them to ensure that they can meet our needs. We also have ambitious plans for the city's transportation network, our parks, our water and wastewater systems, our solid waste systems, and others, all of which are critical to building a stronger, more resilient New York City. Our analysis of critical infrastructure was citywide, but focused especially on the most vulnerable areas. And to help make those areas less vulnerable, our report also includes a number of big ideas to help communities move forward. For instance, helping Red Hook recover from Sandy also means improving its transit connections, including providing more ferry service to Lower Manhattan and creating better pedestrian and bus connections to the rest of Brooklyn. A stronger boardwalk and beachfront across the Rockaway should go hand in hand with economic development, including working to revitalize the Beach 116th Street business corridor and the Mott Avenue Transit Hub in Far Rockaway. As we're strengthening the beaches along Staten Island's East and South Shore, we'll also invite ideas for new concessions and attractions at strategic locations along the shore. These ideas and more are in the community rebuilding and resiliency plans that we're proposing for every single hard-hit area, and I'd urge you to look it up in the book. We're proposing a lot of ambitious ideas, and a fair question to ask is, how much will it cost and who would pay? We estimate the full cost of everything we're proposing to be roughly $19.5 billion. Approximately $10 billion of that is covered by a combination of city capital funding that's already been allocated and federal relief and other monies already designated for our city. Another $5 billion should come from the federal government in subsequent rounds of Sandy relief that has been appropriated already by Congress, as well as through FEMA risk mitigation funding and other sources. As for the rest, we'll press the federal government to cover as much of the remaining costs as possible. Remember, after past disasters, they've come forward to do exactly that, including after Hurricane Katrina, when $9 billion in federal funding paid for rebuilding efforts after the initial recovery and after the initial federal round of funding. So there's precedent for this, and our congressional delegation up to now has done a phenomenal job of standing up for New York after Sandy and getting us the support we need. But now we need them to continue to do that, and I know they will. This is a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of cooperation from agencies and community partners to make it possible. I've directed our Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability to oversee our resiliency work, and today I'm appointing a key member of that report team, Daniel Zarilli, as Director of Resiliency. He is an outstanding engineer, a Staten Islander, so we couldn't have a better man for the job. Daniel, congratulations. You want to stand up and wave? I'm not sure whether we should say congratulations or condolences, but whichever fits. Now, we don't know for certain that we'll ever see another storm as strong as Sandy, and let's hope that we don't. But we have to prepare for that and other possibility of others. Heat waves, droughts, and sea level rise will also pose significant challenges in the years ahead. It's going to take a lot of work, but it's not impossible. Far from it. And we can get a lot of things done even in the next 6 months. We can launch important studies and begin design work for big capital projects. We can make changes to the building and zoning codes. We can secure substantial funding from new allocation rounds of federal recovery money. We can move forward rebuilding destroyed homes and getting loans and grants to damaged businesses. We can get important construction projects underway just as we're doing on the beaches. If we take all the steps I've described, then and if and when a storm arrives in the future, it's going to find a very different New York than the one Sandy hit so hard. Instead of colliding with ocean-facing homes, waves rushing towards our city will hit breakwaters and wetlands that will help sap their strength and break their momentum. Waves that do reach our shore will find a strong line of coastal defenses. Reinforced dunes and widened beaches, levees, flood walls, and bulkheads and tide gates and surge barriers. Any water that makes it past our first line of defense will find homes and businesses better fortified against all the elements, and new smart construction capable of withstanding even the worst weather. New green infrastructure will absorb water. It will divert it into higher capacity sewers, and our critical systems will operate with less interruptions throughout the storm and bounce back quicker if they do go down. We can't completely climate-proof our city. We all know that. That would be impossible. But we can make our city stronger and safer, and we can start today. And what a better place to kick off this work than right here at the Can-Do Yard. Because as much work as there is ahead, as big as the task we face is, we can do it. This is New York City. Nothing's ever broken our spirit or our resolve to move forward. We've got a plan, we know what needs to happen, and we know we can't wait. It's up to you to hold us accountable for making as much progress over the next 230 days, and it's up to you to hold our successor accountable for getting it done. Together, we can build a stronger, more resilient, and greater New York City. Thank you. Let's go get them. Thank you.